Hello, I'm Rebecca Burgoyne. I'm with the United Methodist Publishing House. I was just telling Jonathan my first foray into the book industry was working at my grandparents' bookstore when I was in junior high school. For the under 40s in here, that's middle school. So worked there all through high school, and then off to college, graduated college. My dad offered me a job in consulting. He did consulting for all sorts of distribution, but a lot for the book industry. And one of our clients was the United Methodist Publishing House. They had an opening in 1990 that I said, I can fill that job. And they said, okay. So I hired on there, and I've been there ever since. I've had roles in IT, editorial, product management, and now I'm back around to IT. Oh, and operations. I left that out. Operations and production, and then back to IT. Not sales, not accounting, but just about everything else.
Awesome. And then Jonathan from Forefront Books.
My name is Jonathan Merkh. I'm the founder and CEO of Forefront Books. We are a hybrid publisher, which I think is where the industry is going. I've been in the industry 33 years now. I got my start with Thomas Nelson at Thomas Nelson back in 92. Before it was part of HarperCollins. Was there 15 years. I took a couple years off and became a literary agent at the William Morris Agency, which is now WME. So I was in the dark side for a while, and then came back and ran a division at Simon & Schuster for 9 years before launching Forefront Books. Launched it in 2018 because I frankly kept seeing some things reoccur as I was publisher at SNS that led me to think there was a gap or an opportunity in the marketplace, which is why I launched Forefront Books. We started in 2018 with 2 books. This year we'll do between 70 and 75 titles. My goal is to be at about 150 in the next 2 years. And we are distributed by Simon & Schuster. I don't know if we're going to go into some more detail on something, but we have about 13 full-time employees now and a number of freelancers as well. And if you look at what Publishers Weekly, this about a month ago, had their edition of the fastest growing publishers in the country. Fortunately, for the 3rd year in a row, we made the list of the top 5. But this year in particular, when you look at the top 5 fastest growing publishers, 3 of the 5 are hybrid publishers. So I would say to you, be on the lookout for this new phenomenon within the industry that I think is going to make a difference and help the industry grow and pick up the slack between the traditional and the self-publishing spaces.
So you mentioned a couple things, but I want to ask Rebecca, just so we have apples to apples here. So Rebecca, how many employees at United Methodist Publishing House? How many new titles per year do you guys sell? And maybe where are your books normally sold?
So we have around 100 employees. We are a virtual company since 2020. And we produce around 400 products a year. That's half and half digital and physical. And then within the physical, it's not only books, because we publish for the church. We publish Vacation Bible School. If you've ever participated in that, there's T-shirts and sticker sheets and all that sort of thing. But around 400 products a year. We're also a hybrid publisher. We're the official publisher of the United Methodist Church, and we also publish to the wider Christian community. Let's get it? It's not really the same thing. Come on.
She's in both worlds.
Yeah.
She's not a hybrid, same model as we are, yeah.
So, but with that being said, where would you say most of your things are sold? Is it direct to a specific church? Is it sold directly to the church, right? The United Methodist, or is it sold through retail establishments, online retail? Where are all those 400 things sold?
Our biggest customers are congregations, which of course you can't sell to a building. You can't sell to a church building. You can't sell to a whole congregation. So we call our market congregations, but it's actually congregational leaders. So your pastor, your Sunday school leaders, your Vacation Bible School leaders. And our biggest outlet for sales is Cokesbury.com. It's actually our retail arm, but it's not the same thing as direct to consumer that publishers will talk about. It's a fully fledged retail arm, but it's also our biggest outlet. Then after that, it would be Christian Book and Concordia. Those are also Christian retailers. And then we do sell through the trade through Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble. More so through the Christian retail than the wider
Standard retail. Okay. And then Jonathan, where are your,
Yeah, we're a trade publisher. So our focus is to the retail market for the most part, and then also author direct to consumer. So our authors are one of our biggest clients. We don't have our own retail store. We don't sell. You can't buy books from me on my website. So what we do is get distribution for our authors to retail, and then we're encouraging them to do more and more direct to consumer to not be owned by Amazon in the next decade. So that to me, that's the greatest threat that I face and that I think our authors face. And so I would say right now we're about 70% retail and about 30% author direct to consumer.
Okay. Now, one of the reasons we wanted to have these folks up here is to also have them give their insights into what you guys do. So let's talk about production decisions, right? So again, two very different publisher types, but when it comes to production decisions around a specific title, whether that's the paper types, is this going to get an embossed cover or sprayed edges or leather or ribbons or whatever the case may be, who in your organization is making those decisions? So Rebecca, we'll start with you.
So I would call it a hybrid decision. The decisions originate with the editorial staff and the sales and marketing team. They're focused on customer use. So they're looking at how will this product be used and what features will best fit that customer segment. And then they work their way into a business planning process where they're looking at a cost price ratio. They get some advice from production and set some sort of guidelines around the specs. But when it moves to time to cut the PO, that's where the production staff steps in and helps to translate what the editorial and sales and marketing envision for the customer use into available materials, sustainable materials. Where are we going to work with a certain print partner to get that book produced? What availability do they have? What pricing structure do they have? So it goes from looking really at the customer use setting and then moves through to actually cutting a PO, looking at some of those harder decisions in the production team.
Okay. And Jonathan?
So that one's becoming more complicated for me, actually. And I didn't mention in my introduction, too, that we're also in the process of acquiring a publisher in the United Kingdom and England. And so we're growing internationally as well. And that is that's bringing in a whole other set of issues from a production standpoint. But we primarily do dust jacketed hardcover with groundwood paper, with coated stock for photo inserts, those kinds of things. We chose to do all of our books have embossing spot UV on our dust jackets because our big competitors, the big five, have all tried to cut costs so much that they very seldom do that anymore. It's either matte finish or a gloss finish, and that's it. We do think people judge books by their covers, and so we want to give that extra advantage to the author. Now, we pass those costs on to the author, so it doesn't impact my bottom line as much as it does, PRH that's doing thousands of titles a year. We are making the production decisions from our editorial team, and we're not really giving our authors much of an option, but just in the last 6 months, we're getting pushback from several of our authors on the groundwood paper, and they want a better quality paper inside their book. The UK publisher that I'm in the process of acquiring is more of a 4-color publisher, and they're using coated stock, and their books are bricks, and they weigh like 4 times what my books weigh, and we're trying to figure out how to make that work. But I'm getting pushback, and we give our authors the opportunity, one, to have the final decision on everything that we do for them. We've kind of tilted the model from the traditional side where we don't do anything without the author's final approval. They keep the IP on their books, those kinds of things. And so just recently, authors are asking us for better options for paper, which is becoming an interesting challenge for us because of how paper's used, especially when Simon & Schuster does our production for us. So they order the printing, those kinds of things. And of course, they're buying paper, into the future, and they only use groundwood paper. And so it's creating some new challenges for us.
So
Matt, let me speak into that a little bit. I think that is a really interesting contrast with the way that we do our selection around our specs. We're looking to standardize one of our primary aims in our production team is to standardize trim sizes, standardize paper choices, to work with our printing partners to get to bring our costs down. The only thing that two areas really that we publish that would break that rule are Bibles and Vacation Bible School. So Bibles, as much as some of my colleagues in the Methodist Church, it might grate a little bit. Bibles tend to be in the fashion side of publishing because you can take the same book block and do it many different ways. So you could have a traditional cover that's an evergreen, that's a black leather cover, and you just keep it on the shelf and you're always replenishing it. But then in the spring, maybe you have a pink one for Mother's Day, or you put out one with a graduate with a cap and a mortarboard on it for the graduates, so you can be more fashion driven with the Bibles. And those are also the places that you get the gilded edges, the ribbons, the headbands, and all those types of selections. And then in Vacation Bible School, it's all about the theme and the fashion of it. So that the production of those items is a lot more on the embellished side.
Well, and Jonathan mentioned that his authors are having more and more say in the production decisions. Does that hold true with United Methodist? But outside of those two things,
the author of the Bible has a lot.
That's why I said outside of the Bible. I put that caveat on there. Come on.
There's a conclave starting this week. I mean, we'll have to wait for the decision.
There's some white smoke I'm seeing.
Lightning will strike you. We do have a few top authors who do have some say. For the most part, we offer, it helps if people have a decision that they can make and have some buy-in, but we like to keep that within the specs of what's affordable for us. So we don't offer the full gamut, but then for our top authors, they see what's in the market and they're maybe a little more savvy. And so but then they also sell more books. So the cost price is different.
Well, I have to say this because our friend David Hetherington couldn't make the meeting, but I'll give you one of the quotes he always says. So he always talks about the Henry Ford's quote of, you can have the Model T in any color you want as long as it's black. So
there you go.
Okay.
And I have a funny story about that and trying to keep our authors within a certain scope of things. There's a book you see on the slide there, How to Work with Complicated People by Ryan Leake, which happened to be a New York Times bestseller last week. So woohoo. Ryan, this was his second book, and Ryan was very specific about the cover design and the interior. And he invested a lot of money to hire this really fancy artist to do this work. And it came time to print, and Ryan asked us to print one book for him to look at the interior before we did a print run of 25,000 units. And so my editorial team there, we can't convince him that, so I had to send him a nice email and said, Ryan, happy to print you one book, but to print you one book, we're going to have to print 2,500 copies, and you're going to have to pay for them to look at that one book. And his answer was, do it. So we were able to get some signatures from our printer that showed the actual paper and some of the color inks, and we were able to avoid that kind of a waste. But there's an educational process going on because we do let our authors have a lot more control. But then the challenge is if they don't understand our industry. And while we were in London, you shared with me the video of how a book is made, the printing. And I sent that to Ryan after the fact. And I said, this is to help you understand how books are done, because most of our authors have no concept of it. And he wanted a digital copy. I'm like, well, let me explain the difference between digital printing and traditional printing. And so those are some of the challenges that we do face. And sometimes we get some pretty crazy requests.
So I didn't even pay Jonathan to say that, but if you go to the BMI website under resources, we do have a new video that, thank you to Lakeside because they helped us produce that, but it is how a book is made. It's a kind of a revamp for the folks that were around 25 years ago. BMI put out a VHS tape of that, and so we updated it with digital and offset printing, and that's available on the website, free for everybody, embedded on your website, share it far and wide. I actually randomly got an email last week from a literary agent who, I don't know how she found it, somebody sent it to her, but she sent it and said, oh my God, thank you so much. I've been in this industry 20 years and never knew how a book was made.
Yeah.
And so she was super excited and is sharing it with all her literary agent friends. So that's good.
Yeah, Lakeside wouldn't let me take pictures when I was there.
Well, that's why I said it was a controlled environment. But so we talk about the some standardization, some going the opposite of standardization to stand out, right? And we talk about authors having decisions and maybe not in certain instances. But so when, I mean, you mentioned Ryan, after, I mean, I'm assuming everything was pretty much done with the book, and then he wanted to see the paper and see how it is. That seems to be a little bit late in the process. So when are these decisions made for both of you? And when they're made, obviously price is the key consideration, but what else besides price tends to go into those decisions?
Well, the initial decisions are made during business planning. So that's up to 2 years before the title is going to be published. You're sitting down and creating your business plan. You're looking at just getting that initial approval. It's a P&L that you bring to leadership and ask them to invest in the title. And then you move forward to contract with the author, get the manuscript and all that. So some of the initial boundaries around what the specs will look like are made that far in advance. We do sometimes do quoting that early, knowing that it will change, but needing to get that P&L together for that initial approval. And then as we move through that whole process where you've got the manuscript and now you've gone through editorial, now it's time to cut a PO and get those books made, we will at that point get back in touch with the printer and requote, and sometimes are able to up spec at that time. Sometimes you have to make a decision about down specking because of that interval between the initial planning and the time that the book goes to press.
Jonathan?
So I hesitate to say this to a group of folks like this because it's going to be throwing red meat out at you. Price is not an option when I'm making my decision because we're willing to add the bells and whistles. We just pass the cost on to our authors because they own the inventory. My biggest decision, it's becoming more and more of an issue, is time to market. And that's turnaround time, capacity that you may or may not have. Those are some of the bigger issues for us. As a hybrid, one of the advantages that we bring to our authors is speed to market. When I was at S&S, when you go to PRH and you sign a book deal and you turn your manuscript in, if I were to turn a manuscript in today as an author, I'd be looking at fall of 26, maybe spring of 27 before the book is out. I'm trying to get the book out right now we're saying fastest we can do is 8 months from the time we get the manuscript to the time it's in the bookstore. I was talking with Dominique Rocca a couple weeks ago, who owns Source Books, or is president CEO of Source Books. She's trying to get it down to 4 months. And so you've got the editorial component, and you can't really cut corners on the editorial if you want to deliver a quality product. But capacity and turnaround time becomes the biggest question and challenge that we face, and we're trying to push on that side of things. Unfortunately, and I was sharing this with you in London, the publishers were so good at negotiating you guys down on price that they shot themselves in the foot when it comes to capacity and ability to get stuff done now. And that, I think, is probably one of the biggest challenges that we're facing today.
You guys can applaud. It's fine. Somebody else might. Okay.
And this was told to me from a C-level executive at one of the big four.
Yeah. John and I, as you can tell, we had a nice chat in London, and
that's why he invited me to come.
Yeah. I'm like, you must have heard a lot of my speeches over the last couple of years at the various publisher events, but that's beside the point. Okay, so let's talk about the forecasting and actual selling of the book. So, if Rebecca, you're working potentially 2 years ahead of time, when it starts going on, maybe you have an idea of how many of whatever it is you think you might make and sell. Like you just said, you then revise your spec and start to cut the PO. So how do you know how many you are going to order, and when does that decision happen?
So when we think about sales forecasting, a lot of our products can look at history of previous comp products to make a really relatively accurate, being like your 80% confidence factor in your sales forecast. All of our Sunday school curriculum, which is a big part of what we do, is we are highly confident in those sales forecasts based on past. Now, if you remember a few years ago, like the sales forecast that we would have made in 2019, and then nobody went to church in 2020. So that kind of blew the curve a little bit. And we're still getting back on track with understanding where the market is today. So it is more of a challenge now. Church attendance is not as predictable, and what types of resources that churches want to use is not as predictable. So we're doing more market research, which we have done in the past, but we're dusting it off and doing it again and getting to know our customers better to have more informed on that part of it, on the sales projections. When it comes to then turning that sales projection into a PO, we look at other factors. Is this product eligible for digital print? Is it something that's like a black leather Bible that's going to sell for 5 years? Or are we going to print a little, a lot? Is it seasonal? Is it something only for Christmas and we just need to print a shorter run? So there are a lot of factors that go into it. Then the production team makes these choices around, will we bring in a short run and then flip it to print on demand? Will we bring in a few thousand and then it's the end of the season? Will we bring in a larger run of Bibles and they sell for 5 years? So the production team really translates that sales, what comes from the sales team around a sales projection, into like the rubber hits the road. What are you actually going to do to create that inventory?
Okay, John.
So for us, we're fortunate in that we're tethered to an aircraft carrier when we have Simon & Schuster working with us. The way our printing is ordered and forecasting is done is that about 2 months before we're going to 2 months before we're going to retail, so a few weeks before we go to print, I will get a report from them as to what their retail forecasts are. And then we contact the author and have a conversation with the author and say, Simon & Schuster's forecast is this for retail. How many do you think you'll need for the next 6 months? And we try to get them to think through giveaway copies, back of the room sales, bulk purchase opportunities. And we kind of educate them about the different ways that they can sell books throughout the process, so that when we come to making a decision, we're trying to help them determine how many they're going to need. And we don't want to overload them with inventory And we keep the inventory at the Simon & Schuster warehouse so that the author doesn't have to take delivery. If they want 2,500 copies or 5,000 copies, they don't have to take them and put them in their garage. We keep them in the Simon & Schuster warehouse. And so we take the forecast from S&S, we take the author's forecast, and then we'll talk about, do we need to round up a little bit to have some safety stock for, if this catches fire and you need some inventory. And then we put those numbers together and have the quote in order to give the author their price on the cost of inventory. And we're making that decision just at press time.
So it sounds like most of your, again, hybrid, the authors are speakers or celebrities of some type or have some kind of public following. So just out of curiosity, what would then, on average, do you think, what's the mix of retail and author request copies?
It varies considerably because we have first-time authors who are trying to build a business and have a great idea and their book becomes their calling card. And then we have personalities like Glenn Beck or John Maxwell or Joan London, people like that. And so my print runs have varied anywhere from 2,500 to 300,000. So it's quite a variety there. I would say that about 40% right now, 30 to 40% is author need and the rest is retail at this point. I think that is going to change and the scales are tipping more and more towards the author. Glenn, for the first time last year, started selling books direct on his website. He'd never done that before. And we're encouraging those with platforms to do that just so they can make more margins on their books, but also start capturing the email name addresses and those kinds of things and have that relationship with the reader rather than letting Amazon own it.
Okay. And Rebecca, you mentioned how it sounds like it's your production staff who's deciding, do we order, we think we're going to sell 10,000. Is that 10,000 in the next 12 months? Do we print all 10,000 now and hold inventory and drip it out? Or do we print 5 and then do reorders? Kind of, obviously price is going to be a consideration there, but what else is generally the considerations of those decisions?
The velocity of the sales is a big part of it. Will we be able to get more when we need to get them if we don't get enough now? And then the pattern. So if it's a seasonal item, is it going to, do we need it now? Or like you said, is it going to sell for the next year so that we just need to get it on a cycle and continually bring some in? So yeah, velocity is a big deal because you can't, like to Jonathan's point, you can't always get on a printer schedule at a drop of a hat. You've got to have that plan in place. This is where the partnership rather than transactional, it's one of my big things, is the more that we can talk to our partners about the pattern that we see and when we think those slots are coming, the better off we are. But we are not likely to print a year's worth up front unless it's a high cost item like a Bible.
Well, let's talk about the actual retail component. I mean, obviously, Rebecca, you said you're selling through Cokesbury, but also some other trade platforms like an Amazon or Christian bookstores. How do you guys make the decisions around what channels you're going to sell through, or how that happens?
So the market drives it. We have a line of women's Bible studies, and that particular market drives much more through Amazon or Barnes & Noble, Books a Million, through that sector than through the Christian bookstores that we are mostly associated with. Lifeway is less of a market for us now, but that was a big sell-through for that line when they had their physical stores. So, but then most everything else sells mainly through the Cokesbury, Christian Book, Concordia outlets, more so than the others. Okay.
And then, Jonathan, in terms of retail, I know obviously your Simon & Schuster are distributing, but like, is it solely their decision as to what retail outlets your particular books end up at?
Well, they're good at trying to get as broad a distribution for us as possible. I'll give you an example that I brag on them. Well, there's a Harley Davidson book you see on the cover there, Ride Free. We shared with them that we were publishing that book during COVID, and they asked to have a Zoom with the author's team and us to talk about the book with their salespeople. They had 75 salespeople on the Zoom. And so they really are trying to get it into libraries, into specialty shops, museums, whatever. Their sales force is really good at that. Now, with that said, the majority of our books are going either to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and the independent retailers through Ingram for the most part. Now, the thing that I've been facing the most recently is that Amazon seems to be trying to take the lion's share of my print runs. And we're trying to investigate that. We're now putting reserves on our titles because on several titles now, they have managed to take about 80% of my print run and left the author without having copies and making the author go to them to buy the book instead of it. And shame on me for not having protected the author from that. But they seem to be more aggressive in that regard and more predatory in that regard. And that's one of the reasons why I'm pushing authors to do more direct to consumer. But my efforts are trying to get as much away from Amazon as possible. I hope there's nobody from Amazon in here. I might be shooting myself in the foot.
It's all right.
I'll say we don't have that same issue, and I think in large part it's because of the styles
Yeah, the
of
kinds
the
of books
books.
we publish. Yeah.
We can put our books into their supply program, and so they don't cannibalize our stock.
Sure. Well, and again, I'll do the obligatory. We are a trade association. We are not colluding, trying to set prices
Sorry, yeah.
or any of that kind of stuff. So now I got to say that before I ask the price question. That's true. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
One thing that, I go around to the various publisher associations and talk to a lot of publishers, and I think everybody's kind of been in the same boat, right? We had a few slides just a few minutes ago talking about price increases and inputs and wages of all things. So everybody in this room is seeing their input prices rise, which then makes your prices rise. And it seems as if there has been quite a hesitancy in the publishing world to raise the consumer price on a lot of things for fear of, well, if I raise it too much, it won't sell, and then we're in a problem. So how do you guys decide that price of whatever item we're talking about?
Ours is probably a lot simpler than yours. So thank goodness we don't have to print the price on the book anymore. Am I right, Brian? Ooh, ooh. So we can be a lot more flexible with our pricing and respond to the market. We set our pricing based on the cost of the manufacturing and on what the market will bear. This is simple, very simple.
Ours is pretty simple too. We do put our price on our books. And funny enough, Simon & Schuster's been putting pressure on me to raise my prices. And so we see the market as being able to bear. I do hardcover, dust-jacketed books. I mean, 99.9% of my entire backlist, I did one original trade paper. Everything else has been dust-jacketed hardcover. I don't price anything under $26 unless it's a really small trim size, a gift size type 5x7 or maybe 6x8. But the 5.5 by 8.5 or 6x9, the lowest retail price I'll have is $26. And I started when I was in 2018, I was at $25. And I'm now on the edge of doing $27, $28 for a hardcover book. Now, the good news for that is that the author has the flexibility to be in the back of the room and say, it's a $30 book, I'll sell it to you for $20, and they're still making really good margins on their books. And so that doesn't seem to be a problem, but we're not seeing that much of a pushback on raising our prices to the high 20s for dust-jacketed hardcovers.
Have you seen any declines in sales, Rebecca, when prices have creeped up on something?
Price is not, our market doesn't really respond that way.
Okay. Fair enough.
I think internationally it's more of an issue for us as I'm digging into it more, but so far it's been good here domestically.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to walk to the back and get the microphone, and we'll have Q&A. But in the meantime, Rebecca mentioned her story of getting into publishing when just a few years ago when she was a young middle schooler. But Jonathan, you have a pretty cool story about how you got into publishing and what you got there.
Well, not how I got into it, but why.
Why you got into it? Sorry.
Yes. So this is why I'm in publishing. This little thing right here. Obviously, if I'm a publisher, I'm into books. And I grew up in France, and I travel over there from time to time with my wife. And if you've ever been in Paris, on the left bank, there are these green wooden stands on the edge of the river that are on the sidewalks where you can buy art and some souvenirs. But what you don't know, or most people don't know, is that every one of those are book dealers and book collectors. And they have to pass these tests with the French government to be able to have a stand there, similar to what the cab drivers in London used to do. And they are official representatives of the French culture. And one of the folks that do that is one of my best friends now, and he's an antique book dealer. And in my hand is a book. That's not the slide I want you to put up there. This book was published in 1548, 477 years ago. And I'm holding it today in front of you. You can go to the next slide to kind of put a close-up on the pub date there. But I tell authors when I speak to them that books, to me, are time machines, and they travel places we'll never get to go. And so there's nothing more important in media and what we do as communicators than the books we published. When I first started in publishing, and that's one of the things that I think you're referring to, I was at Thomas Nelson, and I had to go to Dallas, Texas, and they asked me to meet with a gentleman who had done a Bible project with him. He was a pastor of First Baptist Church, Dallas. His name was W.A. Criswell. Billy Graham was a member of his church because Dr. Criswell was the pastor of that church. Billy Graham lived in North Carolina, but was a member of First Baptist Church, Dallas, because of Dr. Criswell. And I had read several of his books in college. And I went and spent the afternoon with him. And at the end of the day, he said, Jonathan, he was in his 80s. He said, Jonathan, I'm too feeble to get up and speak anymore. He said, technology is going to change, and the cassette tapes that people listen to will no longer be listened to at one point or another. But the books that I've published are going to be around. He said, on my desk is a book that was written and published before I was born, but it spoke to me today. It changed my life today. And he said, there's nothing more important that you could do for a living, for a calling, than to publish books, because they will be around long after we're gone. And so I want to thank you for what you do, because we couldn't do what we do without you. But I want to encourage you to continue to deliver quality that will be lasting quality, so that in 50 years from now and 100 years from now, a book that is published today could possibly change the direction of a country or of the world. It's books that change our minds. It's not social media, right? You get on social media, you fight back. But when you open a book, you open your mind up to what it has to say to you. And so the reason why I'm in book publishing is because books last and will travel to places I'll never get to go, and they will change lives and they will change history. And so thank you for what you do.
Well said. Well said. All right. Questions for Jonathan and Rebecca around production decisions? Yes, Matt.
First of all, you hold that book, the way you were wielding it up there, it made me very nervous about what that book was. No, I appreciate you guys presenting today. And something, two things that you guys said stuck with me. One was time to market. I think that's a very valuable strategy and something that domestic book manufacturing can be helpful with. And then my question is about, you talked about the P&L. Rebecca, you talked about the P&L and how the editorial department's making a business plan 2 years prior to the release date. So I'm wondering if there's a gap in knowledge or in communication that a lot of these spec decisions are being made very early in the process, and that sometimes makes it harder to standardize specs.
Harder to standardize because we're thinking about it 2 years before publication.
I'm wondering if the editorial department is the one really making the decisions on the specs as opposed to the production manager, which may
Okay,
not
I
be
see
something.
what you're asking. We went through we went through a transition to get to the point that we are with the standards that we have. There was a lot of convincing the editorial department, a lot of making them prove the value of some of the specs that they were asking for prior to the standardization. We carried some specs for a long time that were the singular thing for a particular author, or a particular line had a singular trim size or something that we didn't use anywhere else. But we've really, the escalation of the economy around COVID and what it did to the church economy escalated the need for us to push back hard on anything that wasn't a well-founded choice around a non-standard spec. So yes, editorial makes the decisions, but you're right, it's within a group of specs. But when I think about our product line, like, we sell calendars that are spiral bound. And we've pushed back and we've said, well, does it really need to be spiral bound? And they'll say, absolutely, yes. This is how the customer uses it. They fold it back, they carry it to committee meeting. They need it to be that way. So that's not a standard spec for our other products. So there are exceptions still, but it was driven from operations first, to answer what's probably your core question.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Dwight.
Thank you both very much. Interesting to hear your perspective, being our customers. I'll preface this by saying I don't work for Amazon, but Jonathan, I kind of want to go back to your comments about Amazon. I do softcover books as well as distribute. And you mentioned that, they're taking 80% of the inventory, preventing from your authors from maybe selling through a different channel. At the same time, Amazon obviously has opened up the opportunity to sell books. They've become the largest customer for many of my customers. So specifically, do you know how they handle returns? So if they're taking all that inventory, are they going to just dump it back to you if it doesn't sell? And can you elaborate a little bit more on your concern about them as being, not so great for the industry going forward?
Yep. So a couple of questions there that I'll answer. Number one is, I'm trying to get to the bottom of how they're getting so close on the inventory question, and we're putting some safeguards in to prevent that from happening. My guess is that there's a salesperson that's sharing too much information with them that wants to sell to them, then they return a lot of them when they realize that they're not moving them, and so we've had to deal with return issues with them more than in a greater proportion with them than we have with other retailers. As to the threat to the industry, I'll give you an example that I think, and this is purely my opinion based on my own research, and that they own Audible.com, the audiobook company. And their deal with Audible is this: if you work exclusively with them, they will give you 40% of the revenues If you work non-exclusively with them, they will give you 25% of the revenues. And I think that Audible is their toe in the water to see how far they can push the envelope. And it's not as big of a piece of the publishing market. It's a lot more fluid. It's changing a lot. There's AI issues at play as well. But I think that Amazon, in my opinion, is trying to figure out a way to squeeze out the publisher as the middleman and going direct to the authors and actually giving better services to authors who publish direct to them than they are with publishers who provide them with a lion's share of their business, because they're trying to convince the author to work with them. And then when they do, they hold them hostage. So if you are going to go exclusive with Audible, you are locked in for either 7 or 10 years and cannot go outside of them to do anything with your audiobook. And I believe they're going to go to the loaning, to the library model eventually, if they can. If they can get enough market share, I think that's where they're going to go with it. When I was in business school, we learned about, razor blades and razor, how the razor blade companies would give you the razor in order to sell you the expensive razor blade. Well, Amazon's doing the opposite. They are giving away my books, the razor blades, in order to get you to pay for Amazon Prime. Okay, so you're paying the fee to buy the razor, and then they're giving you the free razor blades, which are my product. And that's what they're doing with audiobooks right now, and I think that's where they're going with books, and that's why I'm so concerned about them.
Well, and it's interesting because if you're an author and you publish through KDP, which means Amazon prints the book on demand, they print it for you, you're paying, let's just say if you have a 108-page black and white book, you might pay $250. But if you charge, $10 for it, you're getting a royalty of, I think on the print side, it's 60%.
Right, something like that.
So of the $6, they take the $250 off, so you're getting $3.50 per book you sell, right? But if I go through the publisher, or even if I decided if I go to a printer and I print 1,000 copies, and maybe at 1,000 copies, it's not $250 a book, it's only $1 a book. So but I have to spend $1,000 on inventory, send that inventory into Amazon. And if I fulfill through FBA, Fulfillment by Amazon, I set my book price, I only get so much of it because they take the chunk for the listing, they take the chunk for the shipping, et cetera, et cetera. You may actually end up
with less,
making the same amount of money with less risk by publishing on your own with Amazon versus going through a printer.
Yeah, they're trying to make it as easy as possible for you to use them for everything.
Yeah.
Just as they are for you to buy everything from them.
Well, and what is it? If you've looked at the finances of Costco makes, if you look at their profits each year, it's almost identical to the line item of membership fees that they collect on the card. That's where they make their money. Everything they basically charge about a 10% markup on everything they sell, which covers the overhead of labor, the buildings, the air conditioning, all those things. But it's so maybe that's the model that you think that they're looking at. That's an interesting thought.
Again, it's just one man's opinion.
I can't see you, Jonathan, over there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for both of you. This is fantastic. But thank you for your passion for the book. I really appreciate you holding up a book from 1548. Sustainable, huh?
Yes, exactly.
My question for you in relation to Dwight's question is, so Glenn Beck then decides to go direct. Do you have other authors who are coming to you saying, how can we do that?
Yes. More and more, especially business book best-selling authors, are looking at this model compared to the traditional model and are making decisions based on this. I'll give you one example, and she was a first-time author. A woman by the name of Carrie Ijeoma. She's a 30-something-year-old African-American woman who has a degree from Dallas Theological Seminary, of all places, and has a social media site called Trade and Travel. She teaches Gen Zers how to trade on the stock market and take that money they make to travel. So it's trade and travel. She had a $250,000 advance offer from Penguin Random House. They sought her out because of her platform. They offered her $250,000 to publish a book. She passed on it and is paying me a fee to publish her book because she's going to sell her book direct to consumers, and she's going to make $15 to $20 a book to her 500,000 followers. And so the entrepreneurial authors, I'll give you the example, and I cannot think of his name, but he's published with Authors Equity. He's been on the bestseller list for the last 3 or 4 months. It's like, don't believe everything your mind is telling you, your brain is telling you. It's been on the advice how-to list. He is a selling machine, and he is selling more books himself than are being sold at retail because they are working their email list and they're developing their platform and they're owning that relationship. And that's who we're trying to help because they can make a lot more money than a 15% royalty rate on a book or 7.5% on a trade paper. And they're using that content in other ways, and we allow them to do that.
So this is a question for Rebecca. So you work with Methodists. Do any of your business development people ever say, hey, what about the other Christians and Jews and Muslims? I mean, do you look at that, or you're specifically in your swim lane?
We're in our lane.
So you don't do VBS for the Catholics or the various synods of the Lutheran Church or anything like that? It's strictly Methodist?
Methodist, Presbyterian, Lutheran, Nazarene.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. All right. Thank you both so much. Really appreciate you guys being here.